of any data on his computer drive. So serious for the application, but nothing critical, no emergencies, no liabilities for the company. So it's not like if I go and disclose this bug, this company is going to suffer from a liability for that.
So you're trying to categorize.
I'm trying to say that as soon as you imply, okay, this is the responsible way for doing disclosure, this is the good way for doing disclosure, and if you do it any other way, you're bound to be liable in some way for the damage that you cause. This means that smaller pen testing firms or single users that are going to do vulnerability disclosure on the side from their day job, they're going to be fearful about this. It's just exactly what happens under the DMCA for the copyright protection mechanisms.
So is it sort of like due diligence, right? If you put out there, I identified XYZ vulnerability or exploit that, even if you're a small vendor, and it's kind of like, you did your pen test and your vul testing, but you didn't do anything about it. Your report was really bad, that you have all these holes to fix, and you're supposed to be abiding by SOX and PCI, and rut-row, you get exposed, right? So now you're violating SOX and PCI because you knew you had vulnerabilities, but you didn't fix them. I'm trying to address your statement here. Does that mean, I'm trying to figure out what you said here. Does that mean if you're a smaller company and you found bugs and fixes, but you need more time to fix, or it's not that impactful, or it is, are you liable for, legal actions because you're aware of it, but yet you can't address it? Is that what you're trying to say?
I was seeing it the other way around, but actually it works this way around as well.
So, as a society, we want secure code. This is somewhat new. In 1999, society couldn't care less. In 2003, a whole bunch of people's computers stopped working. And then society started caring. As a member of the software industry, and I think most people in the software industry really, really do not want product liability legislation on computer software. People kind of bring it up, and then they think about it for about 2 seconds and realize, not naming names, but there are companies that ship databases today that if product liability existed, would not be able to ship again until the year 2023. So, screeching brick wall gone. Just this industry destruction. So how do we resolve, we have an absolutely strong need for secure code with a desperate need to have this job not run by the lawyers? And the thing that has sort of evolved is this disclosure system of when things go wrong, there is an amount of pain. You have to release faster than your normal release cycle, but not so slow that it isn't, a priority 3 thing. No. I mean, you actually have to put some heft behind it. The advantage of having, if you can hit the sweet spot, you end up with motivation to do things like develop secure coding practices. Because the more secure your coding practices, at least in theory, the fewer of these events occur that require you to do out-of-band patching in some aspect. So all of this comes down to society needs secure code, which means what we do as researchers, the legitimacy it gets. The reason the articles go ahead and provide not just attention, but positive attention on researchers is the work we do is making software safer. The danger, the risk, is if the actual disclosures happen in a way that is so obviously not caring at all about what happens in terms of social benefit and social value. If that's the context of the work that gets done, well then the legitimacy of all research gets called into question. Our ability to make computers safer and to make the information infrastructure safer becomes threatened, and from a raw dollar sign situation, the risk of product liability on our industry increases.
Going back to the original question that Pam asked, I don't think you're ever going to get agreement among people. I mean, it's It's impossible. Stefano with the little vendors, everybody else with the big vendors, all the big vendors get together. It doesn't matter. There's hundreds of thousands of people out there developing software that are all going to have their same standards. There's everybody from large companies and internal vulnerability finders like people in ISS to the people inside Microsoft themselves to everywhere else that are going to do things responsibly. And then you got the imbeciles out there that are dying to get a vulnerability so that they could throw it out there as quickly as possible. You're not going to get any concise, consolidated input. You are going to have to resort to product liability before vendors start to do things because there is a financial motivation. And I love to see liability lawsuits against lawyers. I hate class action attorneys. Let me get that clearly straight. But at the same time, it's like sometimes it takes class action lawsuits or it takes regulations because here's the thing. I don't think society, a good portion of society, really cares about secure software. They think it's there, it kind of works. If they really cared about secure software, nobody'd do online banking anymore. Nobody would buy a Mac anymore. I mean, especially Mac. I mean, it's like, oh, it's the people's fault because they're holding the phone wrong, that the phone doesn't work. You can't convince an Apple user that their products have any flaws whatsoever. You got to have, and that's the problem. People don't really want or care about software. And until vendors start thinking, because there's musts and there's shoulds. And basically, unless something is a must, people should all over themselves. I'll say, he said it close, so I'll say it close too. Basically, unless a vendor thinks that they have to do something, they won't. Microsoft had their Come to Jesus talk back in 2003 where they basically shut the company down because they're not going to have major vulnerabilities again, and that security was a process. Before that, it was like one of the most... Well, it's a process now. I'm not saying it's perfect because here's the thing. Everybody says we're security. We're not security professionals. If we're security professionals, you should get out because you're an outright failure. Because the definition of security is freedom from risk, right? Look it up. Definition of security is freedom from risk. If we're going to do your job right, you're a risk management professional. And that means that there's always going to be losses. Your job is to control what losses there will be. Period. If anybody thinks there's going to be perfect software, you're delusional, no matter what process it is. Again, how can we make the process reasonable to mitigate any likelihood of loss? That's the type of things people should be asking themselves. If there is a vulnerability, what can we do to reduce the likelihood of that vulnerability existing? And then what can we do to accelerate the process of fixing it? That's the issue that nobody's saying. If people think people care about security, no. The end users don't give a damn about security because they're using everything, and everything people are using are insecure. Nobody should be going to an ATM machine after the articles came out today, but they are.
But not everyone's aware of it. That's the issue.
Let me give you an example. Sorry, one last thing. One last thing, and I'll give you the mic, and you can keep it.
Please.
Basically, just think of it this way. How many people remember Blaster Worm? Blaster was announced during DEF CON or Blackhat or whatever it was in 2003. And what happened? The media came out and said, your computers are screwed. Your computers will break. Hackers will take over the internet. And by the way, just download the fix from Microsoft. It's free. It's automatic. And then all of a sudden, a month later, people had a month of headline-making news. Top of the news broadcast, and yet a month later, like hundreds of millions of computers were affected by Blaster. People don't care about security, and if you think they care, you're delusional.
So you're actually touching on a really important point about the shared responsibility that we all have as part of the ecosystem. So, the vendor could actually have the fix out, but if the customers don't have, a decent way to deploy those fixes, then guess what? That's going to be, the point where they're really at risk, right? So, there is absolutely a shared responsibility among all of us, right? So the vendors obviously have the responsibility to, work in secure development practices and improve the security quality of their code. And we've done it at Microsoft with the security development lifecycle, and that is actually, the proven software security assurance process that has been proven to reduce the number and severity of vulnerabilities that are found in our code, and it is a life cycle, and the end of at the end of that life cycle, there is the response process, and that's what we're talking about right here. Is that just that piece of that entire life cycle? But the knowledge that we get from, you know, those residual vulnerabilities that made it through, you know, and slipped through some of those earlier software security assurance processes, we feed that knowledge back in order to try to eliminate those classes of vulnerabilities in the future. And that is what software vendors and hardware vendors, you know, any vendor, you know, is really going to need to do to actually start making a dent, you know, in their security of their own products. But yeah, I think Dan wants to say something.
I think Stefano's next.
Yeah, no, but it was just a quick comment on that, because you when talking about the easiness of applying fixes, I just remembered Claudio's talk from a few minutes ago, and basically we have pulled from his talk a vulnerability which the virtualization vendor, I will not even need to tell you which virtualization vendor it is, wasn't able to patch in time. So we were in touch with them and they weren't able to release that. We pulled that from the demo. But there was another vulnerability which we actually demonstrated, which has been patched. And the patches over the vendor website, in the knowledge base, hidden behind a knowledge base article, with the usual sign, beware of the leopard before you enter, because it's very hidden and no one will ever get to deploy that unless they realize that they have a problem and they go there and specifically download and fix. And this is, in my opinion, another point where most vendors, most mainstream vendors, Microsoft is a prime example, are really doing a lot of work to try to get people to install patches timely, in trying to make patches easy to install. A lot of other vendors either cannot or in most cases have not yet realized that actually making it easy for people to patch their systems is a key component of making them more secure. Yeah, it's way more than that, but that's a key component of it.
So, I'm not a car person. I want to take my car. Oh, well, I'm actually hanging out in New York lately, so that's actually a yes. But I do own a car, and I want to take my key and turn the ignition and go places. And I have friends who love cars. They have custom tires. They bling those things out. You know what? I don't even want to check my oil gauge. And you know what? I don't care. I still want it to turn on. That doesn't mean I don't check my oil. That doesn't mean I don't want the car to go. I want both. I'm unreasonable. Deal with it. That's kind of how it is with security. I don't want to get hacked. Using the voice of an average user. Average user may not want to do a thing about maintaining their computer, but they still do not want to get hacked. And if they get hacked, they're really, really unhappy. And so it's not that users don't care about security. It's that you're blaming users. It's that you're saying, well, if you did care, you would dedicate some non-zero amount of time in your life to paying attention to this. And you know what? I want to dedicate not one single second of my life to looking at the oil of my car. And so I understand, and people are laughing here. Look, I'd like to extend this one level beyond. One of the most important fixes in Windows XP SP2 was the deployment of mandatory automated patching. Because that's what took, you can say users should go ahead and go online and find the patch. No, users should do nothing. The computer should